in terms of content in this series of 14 lectures. The last 2 remaining lectures will be all practice lectures. One will be further practice in how to do syntactic derivations based on the content of the last 3 lectures, and the last lecture will be essentially revision of both morphology and syntax components of this module. Okay? Right, let's get started then. There is some work for us. Now, the content of the lecture for today is more XP movement transformations, and in particular will be more NP movement transformations. So far we looked at 2 types of transformations, and those are the only types that we have. X0 movement, that concerns I to C in English and V to I to C in French for yes-no questions, and we saw also WH movement. Now we will be looking at the 2 instances of NP movement, namely passive and raising. However, the account of these 2 movement operations involves a number of interactions with semantic information that is essentially fed from the lexicon, and this has to do with the requirements of predicates that I mentioned already yesterday, that is theta role assignment, and in particular theta thematic requirements in general. And we will see that these interact in an interesting way with case, which I will present today. Okay, starting with case. Case is, as if you remember from the morphology part, we talked about a number of inflections, but we did say that case inflection is not attested in English. And therefore we use this same sentence, if you go back to lecture 3 or 4, to illustrate the manifestation of case, of overt case, that is explicit heard case, in Arabic, as you can see here, right, in red. Now, overt case in Arabic, at least in standard Arabic, not in the dialect forms of Arabic, is an inflection that signals, as we will see, grammatical functions such as subject, object, and so on. So case is essentially a noun inflection by means of which grammatical relations such as subject, object, prepositional, that is oblique case, dative, etc., are signaled. English does not mark case overtly. This we have already noted before. However, standard Arabic is interesting in this respect because it has overt case marked at the end of a noun, as shown in the following examples. أكل عمر التفاحة في المكتب. Okay, ate Omar. Please note the transliteration. Ate Omar, nom, standing for nominative. التفاحة, standing for accusative, and في المكتب, E standing for genitive, the inflection of the genitive. Now, the gloss for that is exactly the same as before. Omar ate the apple in the office. Now, nominative, accusative, and genitive is what we call in Arabic al-rafa' wal-dam wal-kasr aw al-jar. The subject case is nominative, the object case is accusative. The prepositional object in Arabic, fil maktabi, the object with the preposition fi, is marked genitive, not oblique or some kind of objective case. Okay? It is marked with the genitive, al-kasra. And it's the same kasra that we find in other situations of so-called construct state constructions, i.e. mudaf or mudaf ilayh, idafa bisifa amma. Okay? Now, so Arabic has only 3 cases. Other languages may have more than 3. There are languages that have as many as 7 or 8 cases. Now, let us assume in a very simple way how case is supposed to be happening in syntax. Let's assume, just accept with me, that nominative case al-rafa is assigned by a plus tense inflection, meaning that if the tense of the verb is, say, present or past or future, if there is such a thing as future in English, then we will say that it is the tense inflection which is responsible for assigning nominative case to the subject. Now, excuse me, this also means that if tense is not there, that is, if the inflection of tense is minus tense, like in the infinitive or in the ing form, then the tense inflection cannot possibly assign case. And therefore subjects, in fact, we will see, will not be licensed, will not be allowed to show up in their positions. Accusative case, i'rabu an-nasb, is assigned by the verb directly to its object, and oblique in the case of Arabic is assigned by a preposition. Okay, now now I just want us to put this somehow in some kind of visual okay. If you take a sentence such as John put the book on the table. Now, in a sentence as simple as this one, the tense here, the tense element is obviously plus tense, since the verb is in the past. Now, what we have said with respect to case is that I, the plus tense element, is responsible for assigning case to this NP here, and that is nominative case. Now, the verb put is responsible for assigning case directly to its sister, namely NP here, like that. Now, NP here, the book, in English it does not show any case, but if it were in Arabic it would show something at the end. The noun phrase here, the table, itself is the complement of the preposition on, and it will receive its case from it like that. Okay? Now, in this case, it will be some kind of oblique case. Oblique case, whereas in the case of the verb, it was accusative case. Okay? So this, in a way, illustrates in a visual way what case, how case is supposed to be assigned. So I summarize again. I, when it is plus tense, it assigns nominative to the subject. The verb assigns it to the object. And if there is a prepositional phrase of any kind, it's the preposition that assigns case to the noun phrase in its complement position. Okay, now let's see how this is supposed to affect the derivation of a simple passive sentence. Let's look at the first instance of NP movement, which is passive. Now, a typical example of a passive sentence is given in H there, and it is somehow, at least it used to be in the earlier days of generative syntax, it used to be assumed that 7 and 8 are synonymous, and to the extent that they are synonymous, then that justified their being derived from the same source. So they were assigned a similar D structure. Now, in today's model of generative grammar, this assumption is not made anymore, and each one more or less receives its own derivation, quite independently of the other. However, the nature of the explanation for what happens exactly in a passive has changed dramatically. Now, if you look at the first sentence, the police arrested the thief. Now, in this configuration, in this sentence, you have the semantic head of the sentence. Remember that the verb is the semantic head of a sentence. The semantic head of the sentence, arrest, is a verb which calls for two arguments. We call the subject and object of the verb its arguments. These arguments have to be associated with specific thematic roles, namely that somebody has got to do the arresting and somebody has got to be arrested. So the agent theme and the theme of the arrest, who eventually gets arrested. Now, in the passive, in theory, if we are using the same verb, i.e. arrested, then that means that essentially its requirements are the same, i.e. we cannot use it unless it is somehow associated with an agent and a theme. So the thief was arrested by the police. In theory, what has happened is that the object of the verb has shown up in the subject position, whereas the subject seems to have been, quote-unquote, postposed, i.e. somehow moved, or I wouldn't say moved, but anyway, it is postposed to the end of the sentence, and it is optional, of course. We don't have. In fact, in languages like Arabic, we don't have biphrases, and traditionalists would say that biphrases are even grammatical in our Arabic. So it's something like سُرِقَ الْبَنْكُ مِنْ طَرَفِ عِصَابَةٍ is not good in Arabic. But English allows sometimes for the biphrase, but English too uses the passive for the same reason, i.e. when we don't know the identity of the subject, the doer, i.e. that the situation arises when the logical subject of the sentence is not known. Hence the name for it in Arabic, al-mabni lil-majhul, أو لغير المعلوم. Okay? Now, if I look at 8, as you can see, I have put a little empty category. That empty category is supposed to be a trace of the element that is normally here as an object, because logically, this thief must be here, because as we said yesterday, the theta role of object must be assigned to this position, the object position. So indeed, the D structure now for this one, for 8, is actually as in here. Was arrested the thief by the police. Meaning somehow we don't know who did the action. And even this by the police can be, in fact, somehow deleted. So, in this sense, we can ask the question, how come that the agent role of 2 is not assigned by the verb in 3? Where is, sorry, in 9 it should be there. In this one, the agent role somehow, because there is no subject, because the subject is not known, either it is deferred, if you like, left for later, and the biphrase takes the job of assigning some theta role to the police, and we understand that the police did the arresting. But in this case here, if there is no by the police, it looks like this position, the subject's position, is empty. And not only is it empty, but it is non-thematic, i.e. it is not some position to which we can assign a theta role. Now, without going into the details of all this, we will simply assume that there is a difference between the morphology of an active verb and the morphology of the passive verb. That an active verb, if you like, because it is active, it is somehow, it has requirements that are such that the doer and the doee must sit around on either side of the verb. Whereas the passive morphology, because of its meaning, i.e. that I don't know the identity of the doer, then there is a sense in which it is weaker as a verb form. The passive form is weaker than the active form. How is it weak? Well, it is weak, one, by us assuming that the passive morphology weakens the verb by making it incapable of assigning accusative case. The first thing is that we will see that the noun phrase, the thief, here, cannot receive its case from arrest. Hence, it is obliged somehow to move to some case position. Hence, the need for it to receive case in the vacant subject position, which makes it somehow move to the subject position to receive case, because was arrested has something, has weakened in such a way that it doesn't have a case feature anymore. Now, assume also that the passive verb also loses its capacity to assign the subject thematic role, like I said before. So the subject position is therefore non-thematic in 9. Interestingly, NP movement is a transformation which creates a chain whose head is the head position here, that is the subject position, is a case position and a non-thematic position, and its tail, this position here that was left, the tail position is a non-case position, but it is a thematic position. I have summarized that statement in this formulation here. An NP chain consists of one NP, which is the head of the chain, okay? And this case position, this head position is a plus case, but it is minus theta, minus thematic role. However, the trace of it, the place that it is, the position, the object position that it is associated with, is a minus case position, and it is a plus theta position. Let us see how that could be. Let me go back to my tree here and try to use it without having to draw another one. Okay, now my verb is here. My object, let's say, object NP. I will take my favorite sentence. Oh, let me take the sentence that we have in the the thief is here as an object of the verb. Which verb? Was arrested, which is passive, and then the subject is, in fact, as we said, blank, because the passive morphology means essentially that there is no subject. And in some ways, the object becomes the subject. That is the change that happens in passive, in all languages. The same thing in Arabic. Akala aliyun at-tufahata, ukilati tufahatu. So all of a sudden, tufaha becomes nominative. So, but this does not mean that it's not eaten. It is still eaten, right? Now, if I repeat more or less what I said before, the verb two characteristics. One, because it is passive. Remember, because it's passive, it means it loses its case. It becomes a minus case. So this NP here, the thief cannot receive case from the verb, as we said before. But remember something that we call the case filter. The case filter says all NPs must have case. Case filter. Okay? Now, this is a some kind of condition on the visibility of NPs. A noun phrase cannot be used unless it has case. If it doesn't have case, it cannot show up in a structure. So this NP here, the object of the verb was arrested, will be left without case if it stays there. In fact, notice that somehow, even if we put it here as a dummy subject, it was arrested the thief, it doesn't work. He was arrested the thief, it's not English either. In other words, even if you fill this position with any kind of subject, this NP here will need its own case, and it can't receive it from the verb. So it has to look for it. If it has to look for it, then it seems like the only available case position is the subject's position, where the tense element, as we can see, is in the past, plus past. If it is plus past, that means it has a feature nominative to assign to this position. So this element here now can move to this position. Where it can receive nominative case. And that somehow seems like the analysis predicts that this NP cannot show up with an object case or accusative case. It can only show up with a nominative case. And therefore, when it moves, it will leave a trace. EX, the thief X. Okay? Now, the other thing is that I noted that, interestingly, if this noun phrase can move to the subject's position for case reasons, well, it can move because this position now is available for it because it is minus theta. I.e., this is not a position that receives a theta role because of the passive morphology in the verb again. Remember that a passive verb means essentially I don't know the doer of the action. Okay? If the verb I don't know the doer, how can I generate an argument position with a thematic role? So that position has to be somehow non-thematic. To the extent that that is non-thematic, that the position, well, we have seen that the interesting thing, it is plus case. This position here, the head, that we call the head of the chain, is plus case because it receives nominative, and it is minus theta role because it cannot receive a thematic role from the verb to arrest because of the passive morphology. On the other hand, the sort of corollary in some ways of this is that the passive verb cannot assign case to this one. So this NP here is in a position which is minus case. But on the other hand, it can still assign it the theta role of the object, namely the theme theta role, because after all, like I said before, if you remember the Arabic example, akala aliyun at-tufahata, at-tufahata is accusative because it is in the object's position. Now if I turn it into the passive, ukilati tufahatu, that means essentially that it is still logically understood as the undergoer of the action, that is the thing that got eaten. So in this sense, as we see, the root position or the tail position is plus case minus case plus theta role, whereas the head position is plus case minus theta role. So essentially this is what NP movement is all about. It is a movement which is first obligatory, and it is somehow sanctioned by two conditions. One, that there is an NP that must have case which can't get it in its D structure position, so it has to move to a surface structure position where it receives it from a plus tensed I. And also we have noted that this interacts in an interesting way with thematic row assignment because the movement is possible. Remember that this is an A position, this is an argument position. And an argument moving to another argument position, that can't be allowed if this position is thematic. Because otherwise this NP would receive a theta roll from here and a theta roll from there, which is not possible. Logically, you cannot be a doer and a doee at the same time. Okay. So that is essentially what I wanted to say about the passive. We will look at another instantiation of the same type of movement rule, i.e. NP movement, but this time not with passive verbs, which have the peculiarity of weakening and losing their capacity to assign case to their objects, and also taking non-thematic subject position. We will see that some predicates, not only verbs but also adjectives, behave in exactly the same way, i.e. that they somehow appear in an overall configuration where the thematic relations and the case relations are more or less the same as in the passive case. Now, similarly, raising, we call these predicates raising predicates. Why? Because the NP if you remember that this NP is somehow in a lower position, as you can see, it's here. Okay, when it moves to the subject's position and therefore to a higher position. So we call this type of movement a raising type of movement. In the case of the raising predicates, these will in fact induce the same phenomenon, but across a closer boundary. There will be some kind of IP here, okay? Not just inside the same clause, like here. Okay, this is the same clause IP. There will be two IPs, okay? And some element here will move there. We will see that in more detail. So I was saying that raising predicates, and I just explained the idea of raising because they move up to the subject's position, are sanctioned by the same chain conditions. They are sanctioned means essentially they are more or less, if you like, licensed in a way. Well, let me say it more simply. They conform to the same conditions. They observe the same conditions, the same chain conditions, of course, given above for the passive. Raising predicates are predicates such as seem, appear, be likely, be certain, and others. Consider the following pair of sentences. Now, 10, A and B, it seems that John, or it seems John is happy today. Or John seems to be happy today, okay? Now, in some ways, you do understand that the two sentences are exactly the same. So again, we are in some kind of synonymy relationship like we saw before with the passive. It seems John is happy today. John seems to be happy today. So what is the difference between A and B? Well, it seems that the only difference, or there are two things. One is that the tense inflection of the embedded clause, of the complement clause, is different. Here it is to, and there it is minus tense plus tense. The other thing is that John, which appears in the subject position of the embedded clause, seems to have moved somehow to the subject position of the higher verb of the higher clause. So essentially the observation is that 10A and B are synonymous, but they differ syntactically in that the first one has a finite plus tense complement clause, whereas the second one has a non-finite minus tense complement clause. Thematically, from the point of view of theta roles, the verb seem S selects, remember S selection, that is the verb being the semantic head, it semantically selects. S selects meaning essentially semantically selects, as opposed to the syntactic selection, which is category selection. C selects. S selects a theme complement clause and a non-thematic subject. In other words, seem here is a verb that is peculiar. It looks already like a passive right from the beginning. Why? Look at the subject. It is an it. What is it? Does it refer to anybody? Does it refer to anything in the world? It doesn't seem to. In other words, the subject of this verb seem here seems to be some entity that does not receive a thematic role. It cannot be associated with doer type of semantic role. It seems. In fact, if you translate it in Arabic, you will get it easily. يبدو. ما الذي يبدو؟ يبدو أن عليا فرح or something like that, you know. Clearly, يبدو doesn't seem to have any kind of doer type of association with it. So it seems like the subject position of the verb seem in terms of thematic role assignment is non-thematic. However, John is happy today. Clearly there, John is somehow the person concerned by the idea of happiness. Okay? Now, but in B, it seems that things have somehow changed. John, which was here the subject, seemed to have moved. But it couldn't do it here. You cannot say John seems is happy. That's not English. John seems is happy is not English. But when the inflection is minus tense, John must move again. It cannot stay there. And even if you kept the same, it seems John to be happy today, that is not English either. In other words, that John cannot surface there. And if it cannot surface there, that's because of what we said before, the case filter, which says basically that all NPs must have case. But in this position, to does not assign case. The infinitive to be does not assign case. It is minus tense. And seem does not take an object. It cannot assign case. It takes a clausal complement, a whole sentence as a complement. So if it has any kind of case, it can only be abstract, other than if it does have any case at all. So clearly this John here, in the context of an infinitival be, is going to be left without any case value, any case feature. So insofar that it's going to be left without case, if it can move to an empty position, then it will do. But if that position is already filled, then it stays there. And the result is ungrammatical, because it would be, it seems John to be happy. That is not English. So how do we then relate these two sentences together? And more specifically, how do we derive the sentence in 10b? Well, the derivation of 10b is as follows. And you will see that it is very much reminiscent. It sort of makes us remember what we said, and it reminds us of what we said before concerning the passive. The D structure for this sentence, John seems to be happy, is going to be plus tense seems John minus tense to be happy. I don't give you much detail, many details about structure, simply to make you focus on the most important aspect of the structure. The embedded clause here is John to be happy. There it is minus tense. And John, like I said, is in a position which is minus case. But it is a plus theta position because it receives its thematic role not from seem, because it's not the direct object of the verb seem. It's not a direct complement of it. The whole sentence is a complement of seem. You cannot have a sentence in English like, it seems, full stop. You always have to say, it seems something, that John is happy, that the weather is going to change, whatever. Okay? So, John is not the direct object of seem. It will not receive case from it, and therefore, it can only receive case from somewhere else. On the other hand, for its thematic role, it received it from the adjective happy, because indeed who is happy is John. Okay? Now, look at this in red. The chain structure that we talked about. Minus case plus theta rho. But this time not from the verb. It is from the predicate inside the embedded clause. And then, this position here, we said that seem does not take any thematic subject. That is, a subject that can receive a thematic role like doer. Hence, the use of the dummy it. We call that dummy subject, i.e. dummy. It doesn't refer to anything or anybody in particular. So, it is a minus theta rho, dummy it, and it is a plus case because this one is plus tense, unlike this one. So, well, if I am John, I am a noun phrase, and I need case. I look around me, what do I see? I find minus tense. Minus tense cannot help me. It does not assign case. On the other hand, if I look further up the structure, I may see that there is an element here that is plus tense. Well, that one has a case feature to assign, but there is no NP for it. Aha, well, I simply fly. I move. John moves to the subject position of the higher clause, and the result is, of course, the correct sentence. John seems to be happy. Let's see that on the board, maybe. So here is our okay, so here is our happy. Here's our B, 2. Now, as we said, this is minus tense. That's why we have 2. John is at this structure here. And the verb seem is here. And then this is plus tense, since it is in the present, seems. And then, what do we have here? Well, we said that the verb seem does not take a thematic subject, an empty position. Why? Because there is nothing. We can fill it with an it, okay? And that it will produce, it seems John to be happy, which is not English. Why? Well, that's English. It seems John to be happy is not correct. Why? Because we will say the explanation from the point of view of this theory is that John is in a position where it cannot show up, it cannot be heard, simply because it does not have case. It cannot receive it from seem, because it's not its direct object. What is the direct object of the verb seem is the entire IP. Okay? Nor can it receive it from minus tense, because minus tense does not assign case, as we have seen in case assignment. So if it can't receive case from the verb, it can't receive case from the minus tense inflection, where can it receive it from? Certainly not in this position. Hence the need for it to migrate, to move. And when it does, the result is felicitous, i.e. is okay. John is happy where it lands in the higher position, because now it can receive its case from plus tense. Okay, I hope you're taking the time to write all of this for your understanding of the whole story. Now, John has landed in the higher subject position when it originated, and this time John in the D structure position will become, obviously, a trace. Footprints, what I called yesterday the footprints. Okay? Now, as you can see, here is the boundary of IP, and this time NP movement seems to have taken the subject of the embedded clause and moved it to the subject of the higher clause. In earlier days of generative grammar, it used to be called subject to subject raising. Okay? Right, well, that's basically it. Again, to end the story, remember again that what we have created is a chain, an NP chain, in which this case the trace position is one which is minus case but plus theta, and the landing site for it, that is the head position, is plus case minus theta, exactly conforming to the chain structure that we have identified for the passive, and at the same time satisfying the case filter, because this NP now, having moved to this position, it can receive case from the plus tense inflection. In conclusion of this lecture, in this lecture we have seen that the thematic status of syntactic position interacts in a significant way with syntactic processes such as passive and raising, and in particular that NP movement is obligatory for case reasons. Why is it obligatory? Because of the case filter, and NP that does not have case cannot possibly show up in the structure, so it has to look for its case if it doesn't have one already where it is. And it moves an NP from a thematic and caseless position to a non-thematic or case-marked position, the NP chain. Thank you very much.